Namaste. Good afternoon and welcome to this very special event. Before we commence with the actual flow of the event, I request all of you to stand up for the national anthem. Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen, and our constituency of young attendees comprising students, architects, engineers, and other professionals. My name is Dr. Arshia Sethi. I'm a friend of the Jain family, and it's a privilege for me to carry you through today's program. On behalf of the Prem Jain Memorial Trust, I welcome you to the Prem Jain Memorial Address function. The Trust has been founded in the memory of the late Dr. Prem Jain, architect of the modern green building movement, who ushered in a paradigm shift in the way buildings are conceived and designed. He worked towards ensuring that India stands tall in the global green building movement, and from the bottom of his heart, he aspired for Bharat to emerge as the Jagat Guru in sustainable built environment. Our chief guest, Dr. Saraswat, our keynote speaker, architect Shankar, our board of governors, trustees, partners, and friends. A warm welcome to each one of you. Your presence here means a lot, not just to the Trust, but to the building environment and the natural environment of our country. The Prem Jain Memorial Trust has been founded with the specific purpose of promoting sustainability and a love for Mother Nature. It aims at doing this by creating, establishing, and maintaining a sustainability paradigm through education, recognition, and nurturing of our present and future generations. The Trust aims at identifying future leaders, India's young talent pool, nurturing them, educating and informing them about sustainable development ecosystems, in the hope that they can be the catalysts for the future, for global development, and advocates for the environment. You'll be happy to know that the Harit Prem Bharat Mahotsav, which has been the week-long list of activities going well into the count of 50, have been supported by prestigious industry societies and organizations, many of whom are represented here in our audience. Some amongst them are the Indian Green Building Council, the Indian Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, the Indian Plumbing Association, Defense Infrastructure Planning and Management Council of India, Fire Security Association of India, as well as premier academic institutions like the School of Planning and Architecture, Gateway University, Amity College, APJ College, and all of them have worked on this project through the Pan-Indian networks. Before I proceed further, I'd like to say a word about Dr. Prem Jain. He graduated from the Banaras Hindu University in 1957 and obtained the highest honor of a double PhD in mechanical and electrical engineering from the University of Minnesota in the United States of America in 1965. Now, many present here know Dr. Jain's trajectory of work, but for our young students present here, I think his story must be told because it is one of the most inspiring and motivational stories. With an idea to build a consultancy firm which would continue after him, he created Spectral in 1980, taking it to the country's most respected premier consulting firm in MEP design within 3 decades. Through his career, he designed iconic buildings, offered services for iconic buildings in India, including Vigyan Bhavan, AIMS, the Baha'i Temple, Siddhi Vinayak Temple, and many more. As advisor to the President of India, he gave inputs for the air conditioning of the Darbar Hall in Rashtrapati Bhavan. He was also the technical advisor to the PMO between 1984 and 1990, involved in the design of service systems for the PM office in South Block and North Block. Since Spectral had designed energy-efficient and fire-safe buildings for 3 decades, he was invited to design the first Green Business Center in Hyderabad. Indian Green Building Council was founded and Spectral team designed Godrej Green Business Center. In 2011, Spectral merged with the world's largest consulting firm called AECOM, and Dr. Jain took over as the chairman emeritus of AECOM India with 1 lakh engineers and architects in 150 countries as members. He became the chairman of the Indian Green Building Council in 2007, driving awareness amongst Indians about a greener way of life. His dream was to make India the world leader in green designing, and that is why he is revered as the father of green buildings. He was a Karam Yogi and worked relentlessly to create 23 chapters of IGBC across India. He was instrumental also in visualizing that 10 billion square feet of green building footprint could be by India achieved by the year of 2022. You'd be surprised to know that India reached the 1 billion square foot registered green footprint in 2012, which in its own schedule of things was 3 years ahead of schedule. There is so much that I can tell you, but you're going to get to know more about him as the evening proceeds. This is particularly addressed to the younger generations. And I would just like to mention that instead of encapsulating this giant of a man and his achievements in words, why don't we see instead a short film on Dr. Jain and the trust formed to uphold his vision, work, and memory. We will now see the film.
If we can change the way we think about buildings, maybe what we build will change the world. Urban India in the 21st century is racing at a breathless pace. powering aspirations for bigger, better, and more. But this fast-paced growth brings some serious challenges of the modern times. Today, we are on the verge of exhausting our natural resources and our environmental bounties. Our society is in desperate need of a revolution to save and preserve sustainable habitat for our future generations. The seeds for one such revolution were sown many decades ago, when a wise mother shared her far-sighted vision with her young bright son.
From my earliest childhood, it's been ingrained with me that truth will always win, what we call Satyamev Jayate. She also gave us the love for all living living creatures, trees and plants, the message of non-violence. And ever since my childhood, I've always respected that all life forms are equally important.
This exceptionally talented young boy went on to become a champion crusader for Green India. Dr. Prem Jain graduated from Banaras Engineering College, BHU, in 1957 and went on to the University of Minnesota, USA, to obtain the highest degree of PhD in Mechanical and Electrical Engineering. After spending 13 years working with some best research and design firms in the USA, he decided to return to his Janani Janambhoomi with a vision to build a new India. In 1980, he created Spectral, taking it to the country's most respected premier MEP consulting firm in the next 3 decades.
Another thing that happened in the Spectral time that we were working with, we were challenged, where is your Green Business Center? As proud Indians we are, we said, we'll make the world's greenest. And we did. In 2003, we created Godrej Business Center in Hyderabad, which was then highest rating for any building in the whole world. And Rashtrapati came to inaugurate the building, which is unusual. They normally don't inaugurate the private building. But he did. That's where the green building movement started.
And that was just the start. Throughout his corporate journey, Dr. Prem Jain facilitated a record high of 60 platinum and 40 gold awards from IGBC and USGBC for design of green buildings in India. In 2007, Dr. Jain took over the mammoth responsibility heading the Indian Green Building Council, IGBC.
I declared when I became the chairman that next 6 years we'll achieve 1 billion square feet, 1 square foot by every Indian. My slogan was very simple.
His slogan became more than a reality when India reached 1 billion square feet of registered green footprint with IGBC in 2012. 3 years ahead of schedule, and further achieved 6.4 billion square feet of green building footprint by 2018. Dr. Jain also created another massive revolution by introducing a chapter on sustainability for the National Building Code of India in 2016.
The beauty of the code is that all municipalities across the country give approval to the plan based on the code. Every building which will come up henceforth, if it has to comply with the code, has to be green. And I know for sure in another 3 years or 4 years, we'll be far ahead of even America or any other country coming up in the future.
This visionary icon also founded ISHRE, which today has more than 12,000 professional and 8,000 student members. Later, ISHRE and ASHRE India bestowed upon him the Lifetime Achievement Award. He was also instrumental in institutionalizing Green Building Congress, an annual flagship event offering new paradigms to accelerate green building movement in India. For his exceptional work and vast knowledge, he was revered as the father of green buildings in India. One profound idea Dr. Jain strongly held onto was of nurturing and mentoring young bright minds, as he remained paramount through 47 years of relentless commitment to the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, as a visiting faculty.
In light of what I learned about Shanti Niketan, out in the open, when I don't have to put anything on the board, the classes meet in the open air here. For me, it is very fulfilling to see these young boys and girls go out in the field fully equipped with the knowledge of the real world. Because I don't tell them books, I don't tell them formulae, I don't tell them catalogs. I tell them real life situation.
Today, he's no longer with us, but his legacy and vision will brighten the path for generation of future leaders. To mark Dr. Jain's birth anniversary on the 26th of January, a week-long celebration titled Harit Prem Bharat Mahotsav will take place from 23rd to 29 January annually. To promote Dr. Jain's love for Mother Nature, the Prem Jain Memorial Trust is formed with a mission to create, establish and maintain sustainability paradigm through education, recognition and nurturing of the present and future generations. The vision of the Trust is to identify future leaders and global development of sustainability, create awareness and advocacy on environment, foster development of education, recognition of public participation and innovation, nurture young talent, disseminate education on sustainable development, ecosystems and built environment, create response mechanism for evolving sustainability, nurture talent recognition and encourage incubation.
Thank you. Dr. Jain has surely led by example all his life. And that is why, even after he has gone, he leaves behind a clear roadmap for us to follow. At this point, I would like to introduce you to the trustees of the Prem Jain Memorial Trust. May I invite onto the stage Dr. V.K. Paul, Dr. Chandrasekhar Hariharan, Mr. Ashish Rakheja, Ms. Payal Jain, and Mr. Manish Mehta. I request you to please come onto the stage. I request our volunteers to honor them by presenting them the uttariyas. Everybody's on stage, I'll call the speakers. Dr. Chandrasekhar. Dr. Chandrasekhar Hariharan? Yes? Okay, thank you. Dr. V.K. Paul, Mr. Ashish Rakheja, Mr. Manish Mehta, Ms. Payal Jain. Yes, Payal. Thank you. I request you to continue to stay on stage, and I invite our Board of Governors, those present here, to join us. Mr. V. Suresh, Chairman IGBC, Mr. S. Raghupati, Deputy Director General CII, Mr. Kamal Mittal, Paharpur Business Center, Mr. Arun Bhatia, MD Carrier India. Dr. Hariharan has just joined us. Sir, he's one of our trustees. Please honor him. Mr. Pradeep Agarwal, President DIPM Council of India. Mr. Arvind Arora, DG and Chairman DIPM Council of India. Mr. KK Mitra, Past President ASHRAE, India Chapter. Mr. Indrajit Bhattacharya, President ASHRAE, India Chapter. May I request our volunteers to honor them. Some of our board members could not join us, but they have sent representatives. And I'm going to ask the representatives. Yes, sure.
Mr. Sanjay Goel from Daikin can please come here.
Welcome, Mr. Goel. Amongst those of our board members Board of Governors who could not join us today, Mr. C. Subramaniam has sent his representatives in Mr. Subir Das, President ISHRAE Delhi Chapter, Mr. Rajneesh Joshi, and Mr. Ashwani Mehra. All three are from ISHRAE. May I invite you all on stage, please? We've already got Mr. Sanjay Goel, Director, Deccan Air Condition, who represents Mr. Java, and Mr. P.V. Bhima Rao of IPA Executive. He's the IPA Executive Secretary, who represents Mr. Gurmeet Arora. That is one of the most formidable lineups of experts in the field of green building environment. And now it is my privilege to invite onto the stage our chief guest and our keynote speaker. May I request Dr. Saraswat to please join us on stage, and architect Mr. G. Shankar also to join us. I invite Mrs. Renu Jain to join us on stage. And for the rest of the audience, may I make a request, please? Can you keep your phones on silent mode so that we can enjoy the evening, the way it has been conceived, and the discussions that we will be having? May I invite Ms. Renu Jain, please, Mrs. Renu Jain, to please join us on stage. Ma'am, we'd like you to felicitate our chief guest and our keynote speaker. First with flowers, and then and with the uttariya. Aye. Keynote speaker. I request you to present flowers to welcome our chief guest, the distinguished scientist, a recipient of the Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan, Dr. V.K. Saraswat. And our keynote speaker for today, architect Mr. G. Shankar, recipient of the Padma Shri. We request you to present uttariyas to them as well, ma'am. We now have after the uttariyas, we will have the lighting of the lamp ceremony. Yeah, I know. It's organized. Thank you very much, ma'am. I now invite our chief guest, Dr. Saraswat. नहीं, आप उनको दीजिए, please, पहले. Architect Mr. G. Shankar. We will now have the ceremonial lighting of the lamp, and to do us the honors, I request Mrs. Jain, Dr. Saraswat, Mr. Shankar, two of our trustees, namely Dr. Paul and Dr. Chandrasekhar Hariharan, as well as two of our Board of Governor members, Mr. V. Suresh and Mr. S. Raghupati, to please light the lamp. May I request you to join them in the ceremony. I'm sure many of you know the symbolic significance of lighting the lamp. The flame of the lamp actually captures the energy of the life-giving sun. It's a symbolic transformation. And the upward movement of the flame is a reflection of human aspirations, which are eternally moving higher. And I'm glad that we in India celebrate this because it is a constant reminder to us daily as we light the lamp that we have to take our world forward to make it a better place. Thank you very much. And while everybody still is on stage, I would like to talk to you about the next part of this ceremonial segment, which is a very heart-touching part. As a mark of love and respect for Dr. Jain, the Indian Green Building Council has created two portraits of Dr. Jain, mosaic images made of thousands of his pictures as he's smiling. This mosaic image, the first picture here is the one from 2001, when he came into the green building movement. I now request Mr. V. Suresh, former CMD HUDCO and presently chairman of IGBC, to present this portrait like a mosaic to Mrs. Renu Jain. We have a second similar kind of a portrait. This is the logo of the IGBC. It has been created once again with the smiling images of Dr. Jain, and again in a mosaic pattern. And this one is for Ms. Payal Jain. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, gentlemen. May I request you now to take your seats in the audience again? Yes, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to another segment in which we have the two addresses, the keynote address and the chief guest's address. And while Dr. Saraswat will come up and speak later, for the moment he's joining us in the audience. And I have with me on the stage our keynote speaker. It is my privilege to introduce him. Padma Shri recipient, architect G. Shankar, is the founder and chairman of the Habitat Technology Group, and since 1987, chairman of the National Committee to frame disaster mitigant design specifications of the Government of India, as well as advisor consultant to the All India Council for Technical Education, New Delhi, the National Institute of Rural Development, the Ministry of Rural Development, and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, in Delhi. He is also professor holding the design chair at the McGann School of Architecture, Ooty. He told me make a small introduction for me, but I don't think that small introduction can do justice to the immensity of his work, and so much as I would like to listen to you, this time I am not doing so. And I'd like to tell you that he finished his Bachelor of Architecture degree from Kerala University and went on to do his Masters of Science from the Birmingham School of Architecture, UK, where he earned not just a distinction, but the first rank. In India, he has been the chairman, Task Force on Housing, State Planning Board, Government of Kerala, consultant to the governments of Odisha and Odisha, and Uttar Pradesh for school buildings, consultant to various national NGOs in their shelter sector, and is on the executive committee of the Indian Habitat Forum. His international experience is very wide. He has been a consultant to the Government of India on the Sri Lanka Rehabilitation Package, mission chief of the Nepal Disaster Mitigation. He's been part of the United Nations Environment Program, team leader of the International Evaluation Team for Disaster Areas in Indonesia, as well as part of Caritas International. For those of you who do not know, Caritas International is a confederation of over 160 members who are working at the grassroots in almost every country in the world, collectively and individually working towards building a better world, especially for the poor and oppressed. He has been the visiting faculty to many universities outside India as well, including in Sweden and Philippines. He is the International Director of Architects Sans Frontiers, the President of the South Asian Coalition of Community Architects, consultant to various international organizations, co-member of the International Study Team on Traditional Idioms of Architecture, and he has been the recipient of many awards, the chief amongst which is the Padma Shri. But he has also received awards for the Best Tsunami Initiative in India, the first Laurie Baker Award constituted by the Government of Kerala for outstanding contribution to low-cost housing technologies. He has been a recipient of the National Award for Best Eco-City Design, which is presented by HUDCO and was awarded to him in 2014. The list goes on extensively, but since time is of essence and we are running a little bit behind schedule, I would like to mention that this international speaker is today going to speak to us about people-centric approaches to resilient architecture. After his speech, which will be for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, there will be an opportunity for question and answers. And I hope our young guests will take the best advantage of this amazing opportunity of speaking to him face to face. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Architect G. Shankar.
Srimati Prem Jain, members of the family, trustees of Prem Jain Foundation. It's an August distinguished ladies and gentlemen. On the outset, let me recognize the presence of Dr. Virender Paul, Dean of Architecture, School of Architecture and Planning, was instrumental in getting me here. Sri C. V. Suresh, who was earlier the Chairman and Managing Director of HUDCO, has been mentoring me for the last few decades, and presently the President of Indian Green Building Council. A lot of dignitaries around, my dear students. It's an August opportunity. Make it very special because we are commemorating Dr. Prem Jain, who walked a long distance, probably dedicated his whole lifetime to making India more greener, and he was always a huge dreamer. I'm just reading through some of the things that I got from the trust. He was always dreaming about India turning into a Jagat Guru as far as built environment is concerned. I was also looking at the presentation made. Mind-blowing is the word, mind-blowing. I'm so overwhelmed. And today, we graciously remember the travails, the difficulties probably he had to undertake, building up not only a greener India, but also building up Spectral, as I understand, which is the largest consultancy firm probably in this part of the world, into a very well-knit organization, taking up together on a huge journey. Sri Jain, all his life, had been talking about resilient architecture through his words and his deeds. I was actually listening with such awe when Sri Gopal, who was his companion for probably a few decades, I was just building up the image, the personality, through his words. And I was truly not only wonderstruck, I just so proud and so happy. I feel so privileged to come to an occasion to commemorate such a great personality. Thank you again for the opportunity given. What is resilient architecture all about? What is resilience all about? Resilience, when you look at the Google, when you look at the Wikipedia definitions, you'll come to know that. Resilience is a capacity to spring back to alter this thing. When you're facing problems is no longer in my vocabulary, challenges. You have to face them and come out with solutions. We have to come out with Indian solutions. It's very, very critical. The age of globalization, I'll build on that premise later. But when you're talking about Indian architecture turning into the ways of resilience, I'm sure the journey is going to be quite long. And within 30 minutes that I'm allotted, I'm going to take you to a journey very close to my heart. It's my life too. This journey that I've undertaken, I wish the younger students actually assimilate the experiential coefficient of what I am trying to talk about. When I talk about resilient architecture, सब दिल से करना पड़ेगा. You have to talk with passion and compassion. That is what resilience is all about. Why do we have to talk about resilience? Is a critical point to ponder. Indian architecture per se is going through very critical times. Urbanization, as we really look at it, we know that it cannot be wished away. It cannot be wished away. Someday, very soon, probably in another 20, 25 years, we are going to see the world almost totally urbanized. Last 20 years, we have had a paradigm shift of nearly 20% migrating to the cities again. Cities will continue to attract people because they are magnets of hope. They give you opportunities. They give you livelihood opportunities, you give opportunities to children to study, better healthcare, and the rest of it. As long as cities remain as magnets of hope, urbanization cannot be wished away. But what is the whole process brought to Indian scenario is something that we have to discuss, that we have to contemplate. Very briefly, let us look at the present housing scenario. We are not very sure about the statistics. The enumerators who take your census, these things, they come to your house. And even if you have a sheet above your head, they will actually take you as a sheltered person, a person with this thing. World over, I don't know if you have heard of habitat agenda. There's a mandatory habitat agenda before us, talking about clean cooking spaces and clean toilets. We don't take those mandatory minimums into our programs. There are more than, when I was looking at the present census, 2011 census, 8 years have already passed by. We are talking about more than 65 to 70 million families who are there in our midst without proper shelters. When I say proper shelter, shelters without toilets, shelter without clean cooking space, how can you term them as proper houses? 70 million families have dreams like us, who always dream about living in a safe, secure, decent environment. There are 70 million of them deprived, out in the open. They belong to what they call the dispossessed society, marginalized society. And unless we address these issues, unless we address the sheer poverty side of this thing, how can we just, it's a huge number. 70 million families is a huge number. When you multiply it with Indian household numbers, we are talking about crazy figures, crazy figures. These figures, at least to the young people out there, these figures should continue to pain you, should continue to hurt you. We cannot actually look at this figure, wish them away and walk out. No. We as architects, as engineers, as professionals working in the built-up environment, we have to really look at it. We cannot stare at it and leave. We have to address the issues and look at it. 70 million families who have names like us, who have identities like us, who also want to live in a safe and secure environment. They are out there in the open. Don't wish them away. You have to take them to the center of the heart. And if you don't take them to the center of your heart, if you don't share the whole these things with passion and compassion, there is no other this thing. And it actually brings in lots of social dimensions to architecture. This is very critical. This is where community-based participation, people-centered strategies actually come into play. You have to internalize the social situations. Who are them? Who are these people? They're not numbers. Who are these people? In my state, where I come from, Kerala, we are talking about very clear segregations. We are talking about Adivasis, who never come in the paradigm of governance, and traditional fishermen. Out there in the open, traditional fishermen and Adivasis who in the tribal areas. So if you don't understand the social dynamics of it, we'll continue to build. We are only interested in having the numbers. So many millions of houses built and across the globe. I mean across the globe, because I work in domains across the globe. Across the globe, India in particular, we built houses for the poor people without consulting with them, and they live outside on the open. They don't accept those kind of things. So when you look at the social dimensions of architecture, lots of appropriate dimensions have to be there, including cultural appropriators and the rest of it. And the sector is facing, the shelter sector, for instance, architecture, unprecedented crisis in terms of even human resources, trained human resources. Looking at the vocabulary of building materials and technology, looking at new challenges for urbanization, looking at land use policies, a huge challenge. New emerging equations, social equations. Unless your architecture touches them, unless your architecture addresses the social dimensions of architecture, unless you make it people-centric, then I'm telling you, your architecture will be dumped. We have to look at it, internalize the problem, and come out with strategies which can probably enable you to overcome that. When I was there, 1999, 2001, I was just thinking to myself, I thought I was extremely lucky to be there, alive, at that turn of the century. Lots of things have happened to my own personal life. Lots of comforts have come in. We continuously talk about the positives of globalization. But what has it done to a third world country like India? What has it done to a third world country like India? I'm just leaving it open-ended. I'm just going to leave it to you, because you should, when you talk about globalization, positive this thing, you should also remember that globalization has brought in a lot of problems for a third world country like India. The margin is widening. The margin between the rich and the poor people, they're really, really, really widening out now. And yesterday I was reading some of the English media reports talking about people making 2,200 crores per day in India. 2,200 crores per day. The margin is really widening. You have to internalize the fact that the margin is widening. You have to, any critical question, you have to have this template with you. Whether it's for the good of people. I mean, it was Mahatma Gandhi, our father of the nation, who said, before you do anything, my mentor, Sri Laurie Baker, who said, before you do anything, you have to ask whether this is necessary. Very critical for a young student of architecture. Mahatma Gandhi, he said, before you do anything, you think about the face of the poorest of the poor in this country. By your action, by your intervention, are you going to make a qualitative change in his life? It's a critical question that we should all bear in mind before you talk about architecture, before you build something. It's not the architectural expression that is important. It's the meaningfulness of it. It should be meaningful. Your intervention should be meaningful, otherwise it will be dumped. It's not about creating beautiful expressions of architecture. Aesthetics do come as a part of the package, But whether you're doing meaningful interventions is a very critical question. First thing. What is the distinction between economic growth and well-being? Earlier, much earlier, we used to have a lot of social welfare schemes. We used to hold hands, holding hands was a very critical thing in India's social polity. Holding hands has gone. All the support given to, all the props given to the poorest, to the poor, the marginalized people, they're all being taken away. No more support for the poor. You have to fend for yourself. Very critical for a growing third world country like India. They still need props, my dear friends. They still need props. The poorest of the poor, people living out on the margins, they will still need props for some more time. If you take those props out, they will fall. They don't have choices. Beggars, after all, can't be choosers. They still need props. Why are we extolling the virtues of economic growth? Unless and otherwise, we look at, you have to look at both the things together. Economic growth is very critical for a country like India. We all want to develop. We want to develop into a super world power and things like that. But at the other end, if you don't address the social dimensions of it, then we are this thing. Globalization, one of the major problems of globalization is this. The role of the government is just vanishing. Government is losing a very critical role in governance. You have to fend for yourself. So what does the government mean anymore? Unless you have some inculcate social values into the governance systems, it's going to be very tough years to come. I want to dwell on this a little bit more about Indian identity in architecture. Let me tell you, with such pride and pleasure, let me tell you that. Where else in the world, let me tell you this, where else in the world do you have such a legacy in vernacular architecture? Where else in the world? Climatically appropriate, people-centered, it actually very proactive in the sense, when you look at the nature of the land, the people abroad had been talking about the virtues of organic architecture. We are the people. Let me tell you, we are the people who got ecological concerns, environmental concerns into architecture. Where else we have such a legacy of vernacular architecture? Look at any text. Before we cut down a tree, we used to offer prayers to that tree. Where else can you find such eco-sensitivity, as we call it now? Where else in the world? We have to respect that legacy. That is what I call as Indian identity in architecture. Where has it gone? Where has it gone? I'm just leaving this open-ended question because unless we address these critical issues, you won't understand why I'm talking about resilient architecture. Resilient architecture is bringing back the glory, is bringing back the traditional idioms in architecture, internalizing the pleasure, internalizing the dynamics of traditional architecture. Traditional architecture, let me tell you, is not having romantic notions about traditional, no, not at all. I don't have any romantic notion about Indian architecture, no. I'm going gaga about Indian architecture because it always responded to people, it responded to the climate, it responded to the terrain, it responded to the physical climate and the rest of it. We are talking about disaster resilient architecture now. We had that legacy even years back. I can vouch for that because during disasters in Gujarat, when I went there, the tribal huts, the bungas, circular buildings, that actually stood the vagaries of this thing. We have that in our identity. We have to bring back that identity back to this thing. And, we should take pride in the fact that we belong to that land, Indian architecture, for instance, is always evolved. The evolution part of it. We have learned from our mistakes. We have got it forward. That evolution part of it, it was evolved. That is missing in Indian architecture. Now, this is very, very critical. The evolution part of it is missing in Indian architecture. That is why I don't want to name them, because I actually started my career in Delhi. I came to SPA to taking up some subjects for masters. I couldn't pursue my dreams because suddenly I got bored. I left these things, and it was Delhi. Probably I was in a wrong place with wrong group of people who taught me how not to do architecture. How not to do architecture. And I came with such confusions, belonging to Kerala, small state away from the, powers. I came to Delhi in search of answers. 3 years in Delhi taught me a lot of critical things. How not to do architecture. Probably I was in a wrong place, but Delhi, I come in full circle now, coming back to Delhi, talking about all these things. This is, Prem Jain was, all his time, he was talking about all his life, he was talking about connecting greener, isn't it? That is the connection that we saw. The whole question is about linkages and connectivities, very critical. It's about linkages and connectivities. And 3 terms that I put here, poverty, environment, and development, seemingly diverse elements. India, if Indian architecture has to evolve, they have to address these critical issues. Can we bridge these seemingly diverse terms? Can poverty be a positive phenomenon? I'm just leaving it to you. Can poverty be a positive? Can it act as a catalyst for development? How come poverty is, we always think that the poor people living out in the slums, they make Mother Earth unlivable. Completely wrong. Completely wrong. Let's take the positives of poverty, link it with development, and we will have a very beautiful earth, the world to live in. What's the connection of climate change and the building sector? Together, we should actually put our heads down in shame, because we, the creators of built environment, we, the engineers and architects, are primarily, let me underline that word again, are primarily responsible for the climate change. We, the creators of built-up environment, we are primarily responsible for the climate change. When I say that, I got lots of figures to tell you. In Kerala, we have 44 rivers. All the 44 rivers are on a certain deathbed. All the water everywhere, but not a drop to drink is the present situation of the country over. Because I work in Uttarakhand, I work in Madhya Pradesh, I work in Uttar Pradesh, I work in Gujarat, I work in Odisha. I know the landscapes. Everywhere is the same. Water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. We are using one figure that you should internalize. The anguish. You internalize it, such anguish. 5 billion liters a day. 5 billion liters. 5 followed by so many zeros. I felt I was very good in mathematics, but such figures actually go out of your comprehensions. 5 billion liters a day is being used in India to flush out the dirt from our toilets. One figure. 5 billion liters a day is being used in Indian toilets to flush out the dirt from these things. 35% of the total energy produced in India, 35% of the total energy produced in India is being used in the construction sector. The same percent, when you look at it, the wood harvest, as you call it, I believe, as an activist, I believe that trees are the only answer for climate change. 35% of the building wood harvest goes in the construction sector. These figures should continue to disturb you. And I have been talking about negatives till now. But local, I think that is the mantra that we should think.